May 11th, 1979. A quiet, unassuming street corner in Brooklyn, New York. The fading evening light casts long, melancholic shadows across the pavement. Inside a parked, heavy American luxury sedan, two men sit in the front seats. The atmosphere inside the vehicle is completely relaxed, almost domestic. The young man in the passenger seat is 28 years old. He is sharply dressed, confident, and exudes the specific kind of invincibility that only belongs to the youth of the criminal underworld. He has survived dangerous street conflicts, he has orchestrated complex financial operations, and he feels absolutely untouchable. Why? Because the terrifying, imposing man sitting right next to him behind the steering wheel is not just a captain in the Gambino crime family. He is the young man's mentor, his protector, and for all intents and purposes, his father. The young man feels infinitely safer inside this steel cabin than he does anywhere else on the entire planet. He turns his head to smile at the older man, expecting a joke or an instruction for the evening. He never even registers the weapon. The older man, a veteran operator who has ordered the systematic elimination of dozens of rivals with absolute, ice-cold precision, slowly raises a firearm. But in this exact moment, his hands are trembling violently. His breathing is ragged, and heavy tears are streaming down his weathered face. He closes his eyes, bracing against a tidal wave of psychological agony, and he pulls the trigger. When you study the dark, heavily documented history of the American mafia, you quickly learn that men are typically eliminated for three very specific, business-oriented reasons. They are removed because they steal money from the hierarchy, they are erased because they are suspected of cooperating with federal law enforcement, or they are taken out because they ambitiously try to seize the throne from the sitting boss. The rules are rigidly defined, and punishments are handed down without a shred of human emotion. But the execution that took place inside that parked car was fundamentally, tragically different. Chris Rosenberg was permanently erased by his own criminal family, not because he betrayed them to the authorities, and not because he stole from their pockets. He was eliminated because he was desperately trying to impress them. In this comprehensive breakdown, we are going to explore the horrifying, deeply emotional true story of the Gemini Lounge crew. You are going to see exactly how a fiercely loyal, adopted son of the underworld made one catastrophic, profoundly arrogant miscalculation that brought the most powerful syndicate in New York City to the absolute brink of a massive, devastating street war with a rising international drug cartel. To truly comprehend the sheer, devastating tragedy of this specific execution, you have to thoroughly understand the complex psychology of the man who was forced to pull the trigger. Roy DeMeo was a rapidly ascending star within the sprawling ranks of the Gambino family. He operated his incredibly lucrative, highly disciplined crew out of a dimly lit, infamous neighborhood establishment known as the Gemini Lounge, located deep in the heart of the Flatlands neighborhood of Brooklyn. To the outside observer, the lounge was just another local watering hole, a place where working-class men went to grab a drink after a long shift. But behind its heavy doors, it was the central nervous system for one of the most efficient, feared, and financially successful crews in the entire country. Roy DeMeo was a brilliant, meticulous earner. He oversaw massive stolen car rings, complex financial frauds, and heavy extortion rackets. He was also a man who possessed a terrifying reputation for making his enemies completely and permanently vanish. He was cold, calculating, and heavily insulated by the rigid protocols of the Italian mob. But amidst this tightly knit, highly suspicious crew of hardened, violent operators, there was one young associate who stood out entirely. His name was Chris Rosenberg. Chris did not fit the traditional mold of a Gemini Lounge crew member. For starters, he was not of Italian descent. He was a Jewish kid from Canarsie, which meant that according to the ancient, unbreakable rules of the American Mafia, he could never be officially inducted or formally made into the family hierarchy. He would always technically be an outsider, an associate who could only rise so high. But Roy DeMeo completely ignored this traditional limitation. From the moment the young, eager teenager started running small errands around the neighborhood, Roy saw something profound in him. He saw a reflection of his own relentless drive, his own sharp intelligence, and his own hunger for power. Roy took Chris completely under his wing. He taught him the dark, intricate mechanics of the underworld. He showed him how to negotiate, how to intimidate, and how to operate completely undetected by the massive surveillance nets of the federal government. The bond that developed between the ruthless mob captain and the eager young associate went far beyond a simple business arrangement. Roy DeMeo began to treat Chris Rosenberg with the fierce, protective loyalty of a biological father. He brought him to family dinners, he gave him unprecedented access to the inner workings of the organization, and he trusted him with secrets that he would not even share with his own sworn brothers in the Mafia. Chris, in turn, absolutely worshipped Roy. He deeply desired the respect and the profound sense of belonging that the Mafia offered. Because he could never be officially inducted, Chris felt an overwhelming, constant need to prove his worth. He adopted the mannerisms, the speech patterns, and the aggressive posturing of the men around him. He wanted to be the best, the most reliable, and the most fearless operator in the Gemini crew. He wanted to make his adopted father proud, and that burning, unyielding desire for validation would eventually become the catalyst for his spectacular downfall. As the timeline pushed into the late 1970s, the entire landscape of the American underworld was undergoing a massive seismic shift. The traditional rackets of illegal gambling, union skimming, and neighborhood extortion was still incredibly profitable, but a new, overwhelmingly powerful force was rapidly entering the city. International cartels, specifically heavily armed factions from South America, were establishing deep distribution networks across the East Coast. They operated with a level of limitless financial resources that completely dwarfed the traditional mafia families. They also operated with a brand of chaotic, unpredictable aggression that was entirely foreign to the structured, politically minded Italian syndicates. The mafia relied on sit-downs, negotiated settlements, and unspoken rules of engagement. The cartels relied on absolute, overwhelming, and immediate destruction. Chris Rosenberg, watching these massive amounts of illicit capital flowing through the streets of New York, saw an unprecedented opportunity. He saw a chance to secure a massive multi-million-dollar score that would elevate his status from a respected associate to an absolute legend within the Gambino family. He wanted to bring a tremendous sum of money directly to Roy DeMeo, proving once and for all that he was the most valuable asset the crew possessed. Through a series of complex, shadowy underworld connections, Chris managed to arrange a very high-level, heavily guarded meeting with a faction of a prominent Colombian cartel operating in the city. The premise of the meeting was supposed to be a standard, albeit incredibly large, transaction. The cartel would provide a massive shipment of illicit product, and Chris, representing the immense financial backing of the Gemini crew, would provide the cash. This is the exact moment where Chris Rosenberg, completely blinded by his own rapidly expanding ego and his absolute unwavering faith in the perceived invincibility of the Gambino family name, made a deeply terrifying, catastrophic decision. He genuinely believed that the Mafia was the ultimate, undisputed authority in the world. He believed that no one, absolutely no one, would ever dare to strike back against a crew protected by the most powerful syndicate in the United States. Chris decided that he did not just want to buy the massive shipment, he wanted to simply take it. He formulated a plan that was as audacious as it was profoundly reckless. He would use the reputation of his adopted family to lure the heavily armed cartel operatives into a false sense of security, and then he would forcefully appropriate the product, keeping the millions of dollars for himself and his crew. The execution of this deeply flawed plan took place in a quiet, secluded location away from the prying eyes of local law enforcement. Chris and his most trusted associates arrived at the meeting point. The cartel operatives, expecting a smooth, professional exchange of currency and goods, lowered their defensive posture. In a sudden, explosive moment of calculated aggression, Chris and his men initiated a total tactical ambush. The confrontation was devastatingly brief. The cartel members were systematically eliminated on the spot, and the Gemini crew rapidly secured the massive, incredibly valuable shipment. Chris Rosenberg walked away from the scene feeling like an absolute king. He genuinely thought he had just pulled off the ultimate historic heist. He believed he had outsmarted a rising global power, secured a fortune for his mentor, and cemented his legacy on the streets of Brooklyn. He had absolutely no idea that he had just signed his own irreversible death warrant. The fundamental error in Chris's logic was his deep misunderstanding of how the cartels operated. In the traditional mafia, if a dispute arises, the bosses call for a sit-down. They discuss the issue in a quiet room. They weigh the financial implications of a street war, and they often negotiate a financial restitution to settle the grievance. The international cartels did not subscribe to these diplomatic traditions. When the upper echelons of the Colombian leadership discovered that their highly trained operatives had been ambushed and eliminated and their valuable shipment stolen, they did not reach out to the Gambino family leadership to request a meeting. They completely bypassed the complex political structure of the New York underworld and delivered a chilling, absolute, and non-negotiable ultimatum directly to the doorstep of the Gemini crew. The cartel's intelligence network was remarkably efficient. They knew exactly who had orchestrated the ambush. They knew about Chris Rosenberg, they knew about his deep connection to Roy DeMeo, and most terrifyingly, they knew exactly where Roy and his family lived. The cartel leadership communicated a message that sent an absolute shockwave of terror through the entire Gambino hierarchy. They declared, without a single shred of hesitation, that if the man responsible for the ambush, Chris Rosenberg, was not permanently erased, within a very specific, rapidly closing window of time, the cartel would dispatch an army of heavily armed specialists to New York City. They promised that they would not just target Chris. They vowed to systematically eliminate Roy DeMeo, every single member of the Gemini crew, and most horrifically, they promised to visit absolute destruction upon Roy's innocent wife and his children. It was a promise of total scorched earth annihilation. When this terrifying ultimatum reached Roy DeMeo, the cold, calculating mob captain experienced a level of absolute panic that he had never known in his entire life. The man who was feared by everyone in Brooklyn was suddenly trapped in an inescapable, agonizing nightmare. He immediately understood the absolute severity of the threat. He knew that the cartel possessed the resources, the manpower, and the sheer ruthlessness to perfectly execute their promise. Roy was backed into the most horrific corner imaginable. He frantically tried to utilize his vast underworld connections to negotiate. He desperately reached out to intermediaries, offering to pay massive, exorbitant financial restitution completely out of his own deep pockets to cover the cost of the stolen shipment and the lives of the fallen operatives. He practically begged for a financial settlement. But the cartel coldly and flatly refused the money. For them, this was no longer a matter of economics or lost inventory. This was a matter of ultimate respect and absolute consequence. They demanded blood, and they demanded it immediately. If the Gambino family wanted to avoid a sprawling, devastating war that would draw massive federal heat and result in countless casualties, Roy DeMeo had to sacrifice his own. The profound psychological weight of this reality began to physically crush Roy. He was a ruthless operator, yes, but Chris was his boy. Chris was the young man he had mentored, protected, and loved like a biological son. To save his actual family, his wife and his children sleeping safely in their beds, Roy had to become the instrument of destruction for the young man who trusted him more than anyone else in the world. It was a tragic, impossible paradox, which brings us directly back to the claustrophobic confines of that parked luxury sedan on the evening of May 11th, 1979. For days, Roy had agonizingly debated, planned, and delayed, but the cartel's deadline was absolute. He had to perform the execution himself, not just to guarantee that it was done correctly, but because the intimate betrayal demanded his direct involvement. As Chris sat deeply relaxed in the passenger seat, completely and totally unaware of the terrifying international crisis he had inadvertently triggered, he felt nothing but profound safety. He believed he was riding shotgun with his invincible mentor, perhaps heading to a celebratory dinner or a quiet meeting. He had no idea that the man sitting next to him was completely breaking apart internally. Roy DeMeo, a man whose entire reputation was built on his stoic, unwavering ability to administer violence without a single second thought, found himself completely paralyzed by sorrow. The heavy tears streaming down his face were a testament to the profound, agonizing human cost of the underworld lifestyle. He loved Chris, but he loved his wife and children more. The survival instinct, the ultimate mandate of the life he had chosen, forced his hand. With his vision blurred by tears and his heart shattered by the ultimate betrayal, Roy raised the weapon and pulled the trigger, instantly ending the life of his fiercely loyal protege. In that single, devastating fraction of a second, the adopted son of the mafia was erased, paying the ultimate, unforgiving price for his catastrophic arrogance. But the psychological horror of that evening did not simply end with the finality of the gunshot. In the deeply paranoid, meticulously careful world of the mafia, an execution is never just an execution. It is a carefully stage-managed production. Roy knew that simply eliminating Chris was not enough. He had to provide absolute, undeniable proof to the terrifying cartel leadership that the deed was done, and he had to do it in a way that deflected any suspicion away from himself and the Gemini crew. To accomplish this, Roy was forced to commit an act of profound desecration against the body of the boy he loved. He ordered his own deeply shaken crew members to take Chris's remains, place them in the street, and riddle the body with dozens of additional rounds from a completely different set of weapons. They staged the scene to look exactly like a highly aggressive, chaotic cartel retaliation. They left the body abandoned on a dark, desolate street in Brooklyn, ensuring that it would be rapidly discovered by local law enforcement and prominently featured in the morning newspapers. The staging was a complete success. The brutalized condition of the remains sent a clear, undeniable signal to the South American factions. The Gambino family had officially handled their internal problem, the debt was paid in full, and the massive, looming threat of a bloody, city-wide street war was officially averted. The Gemini crew survived the crisis, and Roy DeMeo's biological family remained completely safe and untouched. However, the agonizing choice to sacrifice his adopted son completely and permanently destroyed whatever was left of Roy DeMeo's humanity. According to extensive testimonies provided years later by surviving members of his own crew, the once calculating, highly disciplined mob captain sank into a deep, inescapable, and profoundly paranoid depression. The man who never showed emotion reportedly cried uncontrollably for days in the immediate aftermath of the execution. He was heavily medicated, deeply erratic, and haunted by the ghost of the young man who had worshipped him. The psychological foundation of the Gemini crew began to rapidly crumble. Roy lost his meticulous edge. He became increasingly reckless, making massive operational mistakes that began to draw the intense, suffocating scrutiny of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As the massive federal nets began to close around the Gemini Lounge, the upper echelons of the Gambino family leadership grew increasingly alarmed. Roy DeMeo, once their most reliable, steady earner, had transformed into a massive, highly unstable liability. The syndicate, much like the cartels, operates on the principle of absolute self-preservation. In 1983, 4 years after he was forced to pull the trigger on Chris Rosenberg, the absolute power of the mafia turned its unforgiving gaze upon Roy himself. Deemed too dangerous to remain on the streets and too unstable to trust, Roy DeMeo was quietly assassinated by members of his own deeply trusted crew. In a chilling echo of his own dark legacy, his frozen body was discovered abandoned in the trunk of a car, permanently erasing the man who had built one of the most feared crews in New York history. The tragic, horrifying story of Chris Rosenberg and Roy DeMeo remains one of the darkest, most profoundly psychological chapters ever documented in the extensive files of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. It stands as a chilling, monumental reminder of the absolute, inescapable reality of the criminal underworld. It proves that in an environment entirely governed by paranoia, greed, and the constant looming threat of violence, true loyalty is nothing more than a dangerous illusion. It demonstrates that the code of the streets will eventually demand a price that is simply too heavy to bear, and that ultimately even a mob boss's profound, fatherly love cannot protect you from the devastating, permanent consequences of a fatal mistake.